because of the time difference and everything, I only just woke up a few moments ago. And I woke up with this rather maybe unusual story that I thought might serve the purpose for today's meeting. Since we've been talking about this self-cherishing attitude, I've been thinking that it doesn't, and I should say that in terms of getting the meaning behind the phrase self-cherishing, those words, self-cherishing, can sometimes be misleading. Some people who are rather new to the Dharma, they hear about the demon of self-cherishing, that there's something terribly wrong with self-cherishing. They think, well, shouldn't I like myself? Shouldn't I cherish myself? And especially people who have low self-esteem, they think, I don't have any problem with self-cherishing, I hate myself, right? But of course, the self-cherishing attitude doesn't have to do with liking or disliking oneself. It has to do with pushing one's own interest, putting one's own interest ahead of others. So sometimes I prefer to think of this attitude as the self-absorption attitude. In other words, just totally locked into one's own point of view, that others' point of view, any sense of equanimity gets obliterated. So I was thinking that there are times, of course, when the self-cherishing or self-absorption attitude becomes particularly poisonous and particularly obvious as well. I like to use the example of the kid at a birthday party, and there's only one slice of cake left. And this is the kid, the self-absorbed, the self-cherishing kid, is the one who pushes everyone else aside so he or she gets the last piece. So that's clearly a case of I'm more important than others. But it doesn't always take such an obvious form that I'm more important than others. And the story I was thinking of, an incident that happened to me many years ago, not a especially important incident in and of itself, but it showed me how subtly the self-cherishing attitude, the attitude of self-absorption, can affect one's view. So the story is this. I was at a place, this is many years ago, a very lovely area with a large outdoor space to it. It was kind of almost like a park. And this was winter time, so it was quite chilly. And I had taken from breakfast, I had taken a bunch of seeds or crumbs because I was going to go outside and feed the birds because it was very, very cold out there. So I went outside and I threw a handful of these crumbs, these seeds out, and some birds came along. And the first bird that came along was a rather cute, small bird. And I can't identify it, but I think it may have been a wren. And I immediately started relating to this bird. This bird became kind of my friend somehow. And I was feeding it these crumbs, these seeds, and feeling very kind of happy with myself for having gone out to feed the animals. And uh, and then what happened was uh, uh, a another bird came along, a somewhat larger bird, and tried to uh, uh, kind of push the small one aside so it could get the food, it could get the seeds. And uh, I immediately discovered that my mind had casted a little drama in my own mind, and that first bird, I'll just call it A, uh, was now the protagonist and was being put upon by B, this larger bird who I cast as a villain, because it was trying to it was trying to get the food away from my bird. Right? Now, mind you, I had no previous relationship with either of these birds, at least not in this lifetime. But automatically, instead of seeing them as two equally hungry birds, uh, one had become the one that on whose side I was, uh, and the other became the one who was interfering. And I don't remember how it was, but somehow the larger bird was left, so only the smaller bird was there. And so I felt happy because my friend now was going to get the food, uh, and uh, then a short while later, I'm still putting out, more food and slowly attracting more birds. And then after a while, very to me, a very kind of peculiar thing happened. Um, so now my bird A is still there, and now it's joined by a bunch of other similarly sized birds. And then as I throw more food out, I discovered that my bird, my friend, my protagonist, was now starting to chase away these other smaller birds which have come on to feed. And so I thought, wait a minute, this is not the script. Bird A is meant to be my friend, the one on whose side I am, the one I'm rooting for. But look, he or she, I have no idea. I think it was a she, uh, because, and I don't mean this as a sexist remark, um, I think the coloring on that bird was a little bit more plain. And I've been told that a lot of times in birds, it's the male bird that has the brighter plumage. And this was a kind of a dark gray or brown plumage. So I'm assuming it was a female, but that's not really the important point. It was that now she was behaving like a villain. Instead of being the victim, instead of being the one that I was rooting for, she was the one who was chasing even smaller birds away from their food. So it didn't bother me when a larger bird was the culprit, because that seemed unfair. But now when my bird, who's now among the smaller ones, was acting in this aggressive fashion to birds which were no larger than itself, I thought, oh, I thought this was my hero, my heroine, but she's behaving as badly as everyone else. And then, now none of this was very conscious in my mind, but suddenly I realized what I had been doing ever since I got out there and the first birds came to feed at the at the food that I was uh, throwing out. I thought I was just uh, carelessly throwing food to a bunch of birds, um, but I was typecasting them immediately simply based on uh, who was there first. So when there was only one bird there that I was feeding, he or she or it or A was uh, obviously I was on that bird's side. That was the bird I was feeding. That's the one I was trying to help overcome, the cold and the hunger. Um, and when it was chased away by a larger bird, I felt incredible pity for it. I felt, oh, this is very, very unfair. And I was quite happy that the larger bird eventually left. You know, that larger bird doesn't deserve the food. It was trying to, it was trying to chase away, my protagonist, my friend here, my buddy. And then when the first bird started to act in this territorial fashion, by then chasing away even smaller birds, I realized, well, this is ridiculous. I'm choosing sides, labeling some friends, some enemy, some on my side, some the villains, based on absolutely nothing except which one I saw first. That was the only distinction. And so my pity went out to the first bird when it was being bullied by the larger bird. And then when it started bullying even smaller birds, then I realized, wait a minute, this label, friend, enemy, stranger, is not based on anything having to do with reality, any real distinction between it. And I thought, no, that distinction is solely because I was cherishing my own attitude. And my own attitude was determined by something as random as who showed up first. So when there was only one bird, I did whatever fellow feeling I developed was all focused on this one bird. And when I saw that bird being bullied by others, then that bird was on my side. In other words, there was nothing inherently better about the first bird. It just happened to be the first one there, the first one I kind of said hello to that morning. But that was just enough to make a pair. It was this little bird and me, right? And then when another bird, a larger one, came along, it was this little bird and me, this pair of us, against the third one, the bully. Then when when my bird became the bully, then I suddenly realized, well, none of these birds are any different one from the other. Not really. The fact that my original bird was smaller than the second bird who came, who tried to take its food away, didn't mean that there was any significant difference in reality between bird A and any of the other birds that followed. And in fact, what became really clear to me, which should have been clear immediately, because it was actually my impulse to begin with, was on a cold day like this, when there isn't that much to eat, all these little animals are going to be hungry, all of them equally hungry. But the way it evolved, making friends with the first bird, as it were, and then taking its side against the larger bird, which came later, obliterated my realization that all of these birds are equally destitute. As soon as there's food available, they're going to go to it because they're so hungry. So it wasn't like the ones pushing away the smaller ones were evil or bad in some way or less worthy of being fed, right? But they were all equally the object of compassion. And before I went out there, before I had actually made contact that morning with any of the animals, with any of the birds, then my motivation for going out and feeding them was based on compassion. I thought, oh, there's a lot of hungry birds out there. Here's some seeds, some breadcrumbs, I can feed them. And I didn't have any idea of better or worse or friend or enemy or stranger or anything like that. They were all quite equal in my mind. But it so happened because of who came up first, and because the one who came second was larger and kind of tried to push away the smaller one, suddenly I was now typecasting them. They were no longer equally hungry sentient beings, but there was some in that group who were on my side, right? Because I was on their side, right? And others who were interlopers and bullies. And so I felt very distant from them. I didn't have any similar feeling of prejudice one way or the other before I went out. It was very easy to recognize all of them on that cold morning as being equally hungry. But as soon as I didn't think of this before, but as soon as I typecasted myself in the role of savior of little birds, right? And therefore on the side of the bird that was being bullied. As soon as I cast myself in that role, then mentally, without even realizing it, I started dividing the birds up into a group. You know, this one's on my side because it's just waiting here for the food, but that one's not on my side because it's acting aggressively to the other ones. Now, of course, that aggression wasn't based on any hatred or so forth. It was based on the fact that they were so extremely hungry. So when they were all being fed, when there was enough out there for everyone, there was no fighting going on. There was no aggression going on because they were all being fed. But as soon as there was a problem, a supply and demand problem, then there was territoriality taking place. And those birds who were acting more aggressively in their territoriality, I was kind of blacklisting. I was putting them in the category of enemy. Before they were all strangers, all equally strangers, all equally objects of compassion. And then when the first small bird showed up, that was immediately characterized in terms of friend. But then as soon as that one started acting aggressively, she lost the title or the group identity, one of my friends, and now became an enemy. Now, of course, I'm using those terms, friend, enemy, and stranger, in the way they're used in the typical mind training context of trying to develop equanimity. In this case, it doesn't necessarily mean friend is someone that you're close to and you love a lot, and enemy is someone that you hate, but who it is that we side with. What group do they fit in? And the main determining factor of which group it was, for me, had to do with identity. So I was identifying, as it were, with the underdog, or I guess you should say the underbird. the one who was being taken advantage of. And the one that I had first gained acquaintance, the one who was there on his or her own in the beginning. And I could relate to it kind of one-on-one in a superficial fashion. And I don't know whether this story can make as much of an impression on you who are just listening to it. You think, oh, this weird guide is taking sides among these birds, and casting them as friend, enemy, and stranger. That's so kind of ridiculous of him, right? And actually, that was the view I developed towards myself later on. How ridiculous of me was it, and how quickly it arose for me to divide these group of hungry sentient beings into those who were my favorites and those who were not my favorites, based on such things as how they acted when they were very hungry, since all of them were very hungry. And all of them were capable of acting in any way towards its fellow animals. It wasn't that the ones who were more aggressive were bad and deserved the label of enemy, and those that were smaller or weaker or cuter than the other ones were good. It wasn't that. There was nothing really objectively different about that group of birds which showed up. And I should add that after a few moments, as a small crowd began to appear, as I kept throwing out more seeds, more breadcrumbs and the like, then birds in the surrounding woods became aware of this and joined in. So pretty soon the group, which started with just one member in it, just bird number A, bird letter A, right? And then later 2, and then later 3, now became a much larger group. And I realized, had I come down and there had been a group together in front of me as soon as I showed up, I would have had no reason to think, oh, this bird is any better or any more worthy of being fed or any more my friend than any of the other birds, since they would have been equally hungry, since it would have been obvious in that case. I would have just been happy to be able to feed as many of them as I could. But because of the circumstance that only one bird showed up in the beginning and later on was apparently bullied by a larger bird, I started casting them into these roles of friend, enemy, and stranger. And that's when it hit me that categorization of good, bad, or indifferent, when applied to the different beings in my life, in fact, not just the birds that were in front of me that morning, but that was totally based on my own projection. And that projection was based on the poorest of evidence. Who happened to show up first? Who was cuter, right? Who seemed to be oppressing the others? Because over time, they all acted the same way. Sometimes among those birds, the big ones were being picked on by a group of small ones. And sometimes the small ones were being picked on by others its same size, because in fact, none was picking on the others. They were all just pecking for the food. And when there was enough food for everyone and they could all see it, there was no aggression happening, because the main thing that was happening was they weren't trying to prove to John Landaw, from the United States. By the way, all this took place in England, right? So it wasn't because this foreigner um, uh, had this judgment as to which birds deserved to be fed. It was just simply that all the birds were hungry, which was something that was easier for me to see when I wasn't with them initially, because I figured all the birds out here must be hungry. But depending on who came first and their initial behavior and my own attachment to my own view, oh look, that one's being bullied, so that one's my friend. She came first, and the ones who came later pushing her away, they're not my friends. That was based on something that had nothing whatsoever to do with their reality, because they were all behaving in exactly the same way. They were hungry, they were looking out for food, they weren't pushing others away because they were bad, but because their hunger was so overwhelming. And so I realized, what is the factor here that is making me think that some of these birds are the good guys and some of them are the bad guys, when so clearly, after a moment, those projections showed themselves to be extremely superficial. And that's when I realized that for something to be the self-cherishing attitude or to be self-absorbed, it doesn't necessarily mean that I myself have to be acting aggressively or pushing others away. It's just enough for me to put that projection, friend, enemy, stranger, out on others for me to see things in that skewed, biased fashion. This is, since that's happened in my life, on a number of occasions, I've been made aware to the extent to which the way I picture others, based not on anything objectively they may be doing, but solely based on such random factors as which one of these did I meet first? If I had met another bird first, maybe I would have sided with that bird rather than the one that I did side with. If I had seen slightly different behavior among the larger bird than I did, that might have been the one that I developed this strange friendship with. And I have not been that clear in my life, clear enough to notice the extent to which my own projections are putting beings, whether it be little birds, little animals, or other human beings, or whoever it might be. I haven't always been aware of the extent to which it's been my own prejudices that have determined whether I label something good or bad, and especially labeling them good because for some reason, and it can be a very insignificant reason, I'm equating some being, some bird, some animal with my side. I like this bird, it's on my side. So even though I myself may not be acting in such an aggressive fashion, as soon as I identify this is my, in this fight, these beings are on my side, So they're better than the other ones. They deserve success more than the other ones do. And so I have not been that clear to identify that. But when I think back to that situation on that cold morning in England, I realize how just a few random experience can cause my mind to divide other beings into those three categories. And once that happens, then any sense of equanimity, any sense of recognizing we're all in samsara together, all of that goes out of the window. It's as if I never heard the teachings before. It's as if I don't realize that this prejudicial attitude can arise based on the smallest bits of evidence. And I just wanted to share that story, first of all, to remind myself of just how ridiculous I can be. Though in this group, there's a couple of old friends of mine who I haven't seen in a long time, and they can give you a lot of testimony on how ridiculous I can be. But in general, it may be not that immediately evident. But in this case, remembering stories like that remind me of how the self-cherishing attitude, or the attitude of self-absorption, needn't be gross, needn't be very obvious. It needn't be my pushing somebody else away so that I can get the last piece of cake. It can be something that I can project so easily onto others, despite the fact that in reality, don't we think it's true? We're all in this together. So if this silly little story is able to throw into some kind of relief our own more subtle self-cherishing attitude, our habitual self-absorption, that self-cherishing needn't take a very gross, obvious form in which we are in some way or other pushing others aside and acting in this self-absorbed fashion. But even when we're not doing that, even when we're engaging in an altruistic behavior, there is some subtle self-cherishing which is there, which thinks that my viewpoint is the correct one, even though a moment later, that viewpoint could be turned on its head completely and shown to be nothing but prejudicial. Okay. So, as we've been doing in the past weeks, I just want to end with a very short practice. It won't even be 5 minutes, just a few minutes, in which recognizing everything that we owe to the spiritual master and wishing that all such teachers as Khadro-la Zopa Rinpoche, that their health and their long life is a great treasure for us, and therefore, because they're the ones who provide us with the ultimate benefit, leading us in the direction of understanding the precious Dharma teachings, that we try to follow the advice of Khadro-la and bring to mind the 21 taras and calling upon them to help remove obstacles, whatever obstacles there might be to the good health and long life of our spiritual masters, particularly to Khadro-la Zopa Rinpoche. So I'm not sure whether the praise, the 5-line praise to Tara is available or not. Oh, there it is. Wonderful.
Can you see that?
So again, the words in the syllables in yellow are the syllables of Tara's mantra, Om Tare Tu Tare Tori Soha, and the lines in which they're embedded indicate the qualities, the particular qualities of Tara, sometimes known as the savioress. And so Tara is the one who frees us, who calms our fear, and who grants us success. So with that in mind, I'm going to recite the prayer just once in English and then a few times in Tibetan. Om, to the transcendence of Doer, Aryatara, I prostrate. Homage to the glorious one who frees with Tare, who calms all fears with Tutare, who grants all success with Ture. To the one with Soha, I bow down. Om Jondende Ma Pagma Doma La Cha Sel Chaksel Doma Tare Pelmo Tutarai Jigun Selma Turi Dunam Tamche Terma Soha Yige Chela Rabtu Om Jondende Ma Pagma Doma La Cha Sel Chaksel Doma Tare Pelmo Tutarai Jigun Selma, Ture Dunam Tamche Telma, Soha Yige Chela Rabtu, Om Jomdende Ma Pagma Doma La Chan Selo, Chaksel Doma Tari Pelmo, Tutarai Jigun Selma, Ture Dunam Tamche Telma, Soha Yige Chela Rabtu, Om Jomdende Ma Pagma Doma La Chan Selo, Chaksel Doma Tari Pelmo, Tutarai Jigun Selma, Ture Dunam Tamche Telma, Soha Yigi Chela Rabtu, Om Jomdende Ma Pagma Doma La Chaksel, Chaksel Doma Tari Pelmo, Tutarai Jigun Selma, Ture Dunam Tamche Telma, Soha Yigi Chela Rabtu, Om Jomdende Ma Pagma Doma La Changselo, Chaksel Doma Tare Pelmo, Tutarai Jigun Selma, Turi Dunam Tamche Telma, Soha Yige Chela Rabtu. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us and dedicating, of course, whatever positive energy there may have been from even reciting the Tara mantra, even just one time, towards the long life, good health of all of our gurus, especially thinking of Khepche, Zopa Rinpoche. So, thank you. Thank you for your patience, for your attendance, and for two of you here. I sent my wishes that maybe we can have a Zoom call together not too long from now, and I'm going to try to send off an email. So there's another evidence of of my projection of friend, enemy, and stranger on a group of 11, just to pick out two of them. That's a very hard habit to break. Okay.
Thank you, John. Thank you.